April 1945. Berlin was dying. Smoke rose from buildings split by artillery shells. The city's mighty stone blocks lay scattered across tram lines and avenues that Hitler's armies had marched down 13 years before. Gunfire echoed day and night, turning every street corner into a dead man's land. For 6 years, Germans had waited for something: victory, the Allies, the end of fear. But now the waiting was over. The enemy was at the gates. In cellars, old people wept. In courtyards, starving hens pecked at broken glass. And down under the ruined streets, a group of Soviet soldiers pressed on, chasing shadows down into the earth. These men were not heroes, not in their eyes. They were tired. Their uniforms were covered in brick dust, boots cut by barbed wire and glass. They had walked across Poland and half of Germany to get here, their friends falling beside them, week by week in forests, on riverbanks, in bombed-out villages. Their command: get Berlin, finish the war, find the men who started it. What nobody told these young Soviet soldiers, men who carried rifles and pistols, and sometimes just hope in the lining of their jackets, was where to look for the real heart of Hitler's Third Reich. The prize was not in tall buildings or golden offices. It was somewhere else, somewhere dark, hidden, under the city itself. At the edge of the Tiergarten that last April, the Red Army closed in from every side. The Germans, desperate but beaten, had pulled everything back to a few square blocks. Their leaders, what was left, had gone underground, hiding in a network of bunkers beneath ruined government buildings. Every rumor whispered that the Nazi top brass, maybe even Hitler himself, was holed up in a place called the Führerbunker. But there were other bunkers too, buildings under the Chancellery, radio stations, Luftwaffe command posts, all buried deep enough to survive the largest bombs the Allies could drop. The men of the 79th Rifle Corps, a division raised from peasant boys in the Urals, were among the first Soviets to fight their way down Leiter Strasse. The air was thick with burnt chemicals. They watched tanks move like wounded animals across open courtyards, iron grinding on stone until the crews bailed out, hands up, faces streaked with dirt. The Soviets pressed on, block by block. Every step forward was paid for with bodies, sometimes theirs, sometimes Germans, sometimes innocent neighbors caught between fire. 2 young lieutenants, Mikhail and Sasha, led their platoon through a shattered alley on the morning of April 30th. They knew nothing of politics or world maps. They had one job: clear the city one cell at a time and look for hidden resistance fighters, snipers, and whatever treasures the enemy tried to hide. Berlin's center was a warren of trenches, sandbags, and tank obstacles. The order came down: search for access points, cellars, anything suspicious. Mikhail's squad found a heavy wooden door, half buried under debris behind a toppled statue. They pried at the wood while bullets rattled down the avenue, splitting bricks above their heads. Cold air poured from the crack. At first, they thought it was just another air raid shelter. Inside, their flashlights caught a long corridor running off at a sharp angle, lined with power cables and painted numbers. Deep under the noise, it was silent. Their boots made careful sound, muffled by years of mold and settling dust. Mikhail waved his squad to spread out. At the first junction, someone found a set of heavy steel doors, marked in German, with a wheel instead of a handle. The Soviets had encountered many such doors already, some hiding nothing but ration tins and empty desks, some rigged with explosives they were lucky not to disturb. But here, the door was unlocked. Behind it, the corridor sloped downward, deeper still, until they had left behind the war-muffled sounds of men dying above. A stench came at them, thick and chemical, laced with something sweet, rotten. There were beds here, cot bunks, empty cans, battered lockers, and a black phone sitting off its hook. On one wall, Nazi propaganda posters curled and fading in the wet, gazed blindly into space. One corner held crates, hastily stacked and bound with wired seals. A concrete vent hummed somewhere, and in a locked anteroom, behind a battered desk, they found the first real surprise. Three German women in civilian clothing huddled behind the desk, hands raised. They wore red cross badges but had no stretchers, only notebooks and typewriters. A Russian corporal, barely 20, with a rifle almost as tall as he was, asked what they were doing. One whispered, "We're warten auf das End." "We are waiting for the end." The search party continued. Beyond that room, there were more corridors. One led to a sealed box of radios, buzzing with static. Another, deeper down, echoed back the drip of some unseen leaks, slow and regular. It was here, after passing sealed storerooms, filled with army boots, old uniforms, files inside metal boxes, that a narrow iron stair led still further, spiraling down until it opened into a concrete room, deep enough under the Reich Chancellery to hold out against bombing for days. Inside, several more German officers sat slumped, silent, weapons on the floor. One stood up when the Soviets entered and raised his hands. He wore the insignia of the Reichssicherheit, the Nazi security service. On his desk were stacks of folders. Some were charred, others water-soaked. Soviet intelligence officers would later go through every page, looking for secrets, names, any sign of what had become of their greatest enemies. Mikhail and his squad, as they peered at the strange machines, wires, and endless stacks of paper, wondered if all this meant Hitler was still here somewhere, maybe deeper under the stone. They crept on, cautiously, hoping not to walk into a trap or an ambush from soldiers who believed surrender was worse than death. Every turn brought new rooms. Some were offices, littered now with broken glass and papers. Others were storage, filled with bottles of fuel, crates of rations, pistols, and crates marked only with numbers. In one small bunk room, an SS officer shot himself as the Soviets entered, preferring to die than be captured. The main prize, the heart of the Nazi labyrinth, was deeper still. At last, after winding back down another corridor, past sealed blast doors and a set of foxhole steps, the Soviet patrol reached the heart of the system, a reinforced concrete box with a heavy steel entrance, Hitler's actual Führerbunker. Inside, the bunker was hot, humid, thick with the stench of bodies, gunpowder, sour bread, and fear. The walls, a meter of reinforced concrete, were painted a dull green. Each room was sparsely furnished, wooden tables, cots with grey army blankets, steel lockers built into the corners. In one chamber, a faded map showed angry lines and arrows, coloured pins marking armies that had long since been destroyed or scattered. The air was strange, a heavy silence, the electric hum of machines still running where they had not yet lost power. For the Soviets, this was a holy place and a grave at the same time. They had heard stories of Hitler's last stand, of Eva Braun at his side, of the tight knot of loyalists who would supposedly die before giving up their leader. There was expectation in the air, maybe a little fear too. Would they find Hitler alive, waiting to fight? Would he greet them with a pistol with traps? Or would he not be there at all? What they found shocked them in another way. On a battered wooden bed against the far wall were two bodies. One was a man, stocky, sharp-featured even in death, his mustache instantly familiar from years of war posters and newsreels. Next to him, a woman, hair done nicely, wearing a simple dress. Both had red stains beneath their heads. Even the Soviet soldiers who had seen everything, starvation, burning villages, death in all forms, felt the coldness run through their blood. Was this real? Was the man who had started the war, who had ordered their homeland torched, really lying dead at their feet? Was it over just like that? They shouted and called in officers. Word ran back to headquarters. "Comrades, we have him, Adolf Hitler is dead." But even in that moment of revelation, discovery mixed with triumph, horror, and relief, questions swirled fast. The bodies had been partly burned, but the faces were still recognizable. Officers quickly called in Soviet intelligence, who bagged the evidence, files, diaries, bottles, cigarettes, and personal belongings, from every room. In another chamber, Soviet officers recovered the wedding ring from Eva Braun's finger. Everything was bagged, catalogued, and sent off, much of it never to be seen again except in secret archives. The next hours became a blur. The Soviets searched the rest of the bunker. In one room, elaborate radio equipment still sent out crackling, meaningless signals. In another, the body of Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, was found alongside his wife. Their 6 children, the girls and boys dressed for bed, lay dead from poison nearby. Some German staff tried to explain what happened, orders from higher up, fear of the advancing Russians, grim resolve to deny surrender. Among the oddities that the Soviets discovered, barrels of vintage wine, meant for celebrations that never happened. Trunks containing stacks of Reichsmark cash, worthless now in the new chaos. Closets lined with women's clothing and perfume, a surreal touch amid the ruins of crushed steel helmets and scattered rifles. In Hitler's personal study, on his desk, a thick set of folders with plans for imaginary panzer divisions, none of which had existed for months. Here, too, was his last will and testament, signed only hours before. It was as if the bunker itself was a tomb not just for men, but for a whole mad idea, a belief that Germany could win, even as Berlin fell to ruin. Some Soviet officers, sent by their superiors to document every footstep, took photographs, careful not to disturb the crime scene. Others tried to interrogate the German staff, piecing together the final days. Many of Hitler's closest henchmen were missing, dead, disappeared, or disguised somewhere else in the ruined city. Down here, victory felt strange. The men who had fought their way across Europe were exhausted, starved for sleep, giddy at the thought that it might all be over. More than one soldier broke into laughter when hearing, finally, for certain that Hitler was dead. Yet in the same breath, they wept for friends not there to see it, for families waiting in distant villages, for the 6 years lost to war and hate. Above ground, Berlin was still under fire. Snipers and SS holdouts fired down on Red Army soldiers from rooftops or hiding places in cellars. The air still shook from the pounding of Katyusha rockets and Allied bombs. But as word spread, men grew bold, the end really was at hand. German troops surrendered in larger groups, white flags tied to rifles and broomsticks. Civilians emerged, desperate, waving anything white in hope of sparing their lives. The city was almost silent, except for the rumble of tanks and the occasional distant gunshot. In the Führerbunker, the Soviets found another surprise, secret passageways running off in unexpected directions. These led to smaller, secondary bunkers. Some were dead ends, others connected to old subway tunnels filled with water. The search, careful, methodical, took days. Each tunnel held hints of desperate escape. Blood on the walls, abandoned pistols, sometimes a dead body sprawled where hope had finally failed. One Soviet NCO, Sergeant Ivan, found a set of coded documents stuffed in a biscuit tin. The papers, after weeks of translation, revealed orders to destroy the city's infrastructure, to leave nothing for the victors. But few of these plans had been carried out. Most officers had simply given up, too afraid or too tired to keep fighting. Ivan pocketed a belt buckle from the room, a memento that stayed with him for years, passed quietly to his grandson with a single word: remember. Days later, reporters and Western officers were escorted down into the bunker. They saw the chaos. Fires had burned some rooms, water leaked from ceilings, documents scattered everywhere. The Western Allies would debate for years whether Hitler had really died. Stalin himself, famously skeptical of good fortune, told his staff to trust, but verify. He ordered the bodies recovered, tested, hidden away to keep their enemies guessing. For ordinary Soviet soldiers, what mattered most was what the bunker symbolized. The war, still raging outside, was all but won. On May 2nd, when Berlin finally surrendered, survivors walked the streets in disbelief. Some took flowers from gardens smashed by shellfire, tucking them into rifles or rucksacks, a small act of hope for peace and normal life. Others visited the bunker again in the days that followed, drawn by the rumors of treasures still hidden below. What they found wasn't always expected. There were safes filled with passports, art gone missing from Paris or Warsaw or Rome, crates of silverware and jewels stolen from murdered civilians. There were trunks of high-ranking uniforms never worn, shelves of secret papers that revealed spying and betrayal at the heart of the Nazi regime. Everywhere, the feeling of waste, a fortune built on death, left to rot in a concrete tomb. The Soviets' greatest discovery down there wasn't gold or art or a relic from Hitler himself. It was the relief, at last, of seeing an end to 6 years of war that had turned millions of young men into ghosts. The bunker was a coffin, cold, finished, stripped of glamour by its own defeat. Years later, as soldiers who had been there wrote their memoirs or shared memories at small reunions, they would say the thing that stuck in memory wasn't just the bodies of famous men. It was the strange, heavy silence underground, in rooms built for final victory, but used only for delay and denial. They remembered how, even with years of war and hardship behind them, no one could guess what waited around each corner. Another locked vault, another desperate holdout, another human tragedy caught at the very end. Some said the air down there never lost its chill. Others remembered odd details, Hitler's old army boots standing next to a pile of ashes, a dog cowering in a supply room, the broken keys of a piano hauled down as part of Eva Braun's luggage, the smell of perfume mixed with burnt oil. The famous bunker was closed off, buried, nearly forgotten as the world rebuilt and Berlin rose from the ashes. But for those who had climbed down those stairs on the last day, it was never truly gone. It stayed with them, a symbol not of glory or victory, but of the cost, the terrible price paid in fear, in hunger, in friends lost under grey skies. If you had asked those young soldiers, years later, what it felt like to find the bunker and all its secrets, many said the same thing. They felt tired, older than their years. Some felt only sadness. They accepted that evil, in the end, does not always end in a final battle or a clever speech. Sometimes it ends in silence, in the slow uncovering of the truth, one door at a time, in places you never imagined you'd survive to see. Berlin in May 1945 was rubble, loss, and confusion, but it marked a moment when the world shivered, realizing that one age had ended and another, scarred but hopeful, was beginning to grow among the ruins. For the Soviets who entered the bunker, what they found was not what they expected. No one was singing victory. No one was celebrating in the halls. Instead, they found proof that even the most powerful can be brought down, that courage matters, that the truth, long hidden underground, always finds the light in the end.